Marine Le Pen, the defeated candidate there. Well, I'm joined now by Bruno Bernard, a former senior political officer for the British Embassy in Paris and now a political advisor. Also with us, our diplomatic editor, Dominic Waghorn, who's been covering this campaign extensively. Bruno Bernard, first of all, just your overall reactions, a little bit higher, perhaps, the result in terms of Mr. Macron's victory.
I think the in between rounds debate between Le Pen and Macron played a key role in that final result, but it didn't come as a success. I mean, we all expected Macron to win in the end.
What does it tell us about, how does it leave France? Marine Le Pen, let's not forget, got 1/3 of the French nation to vote for her, the far right. Now, the celebrations going on behind us on the Champs-Élysées, of course, it is one of the centres of support, the centre of support for Emmanuel Macron. We would expect that. Perhaps this is not taking place in many other areas of France that voted for Le Pen.
I think you're right, and that's why Macron was so serious, and there was no trace of joy or euphoria in his first speech as president-elect, because I think he's in making the right choices, in not forgetting the 11 million French people who voted in favour of Marine Le Pen and not in his favour. And I think he didn't want to repeat what Jacques Chirac did in 2002 and ignored the people who voted National Front at the time.
But it's not just the far right. I was just discussing this with one of Jean-Luc Mélenchon's supporters there. There were a lot of abstentions. There were a lot of spoilt or blank papers as well. There's the far left. This really is a multi-divided, if I may coin the phrase, France. It's divided in so many ways.
Some people would say that it's divided in four. Central piece would be Emmanuel Macron's En Marche party. You would have the Republican, who are also divided in their camp. Then you have the National Front, of course, and Jean-Luc Mélenchon's people. What Emmanuel Macron needs to do now is try to unify the country behind him. We will see what happens when he nominates his government and his prime minister. It will be a clear sign of where he leans. And of course, the parliamentary elections early in June will decide, will he get a majority to actually run the country?
Come in this, Dominic, and let's, just all of us, just absorb what has happened in the last 12 months in France. None of the established parties making it in to the final round. Two outsiders in different ways in this runoff. And now a president without a party. He's called a party, but as Bruno Bernard's talking about, we have to get the legislative elections, and he has to get some, what we would call MPs behind him.
Yeah, right. And this is in a country that for decades has been a two-party system where voters have had to choose between these two parties, and powers flip-flop between them. This began with an incumbent prime minister who was so unpopular he didn't even dare enter the race, and then we saw one big beast after another just elbowed aside as this extraordinary election unravelled, unfolded. Alain Juppé, Nicolas Sarkozy, Manuel Valls, and eventually François Fillon. And Macron's lucky because Fillon may well have won this if he hadn't had this corruption scandal that he was embroiled in. But we ended up with two outsider candidates. If you can call Macron an outsider candidate, of course he wasn't economy minister within the Hollande government, but he's rebranded himself convincingly as someone who isn't right or left. He says he wants a bit of both, the best of both. And it was a very unusual election campaign in the sense it was very raw, very angry, very passionate. And then we had that debate where Marine Le Pen was seen as kind of overstretching, I think, and not performing as well as she'd have hoped. And we now end up with a a president running a party that he nearly set up a year ago with no parliamentary power.
Well, that's the point, isn't it, Bruno Bernard? Very, very strange in the sense that it shows that you can break the political mould in very different ways, but nevertheless he's, as Dominic describes there, he's both an outsider and an insider. He is from the core of the French establishment, but never had elected political office.
That's the true revolution of this election. And I think that's what worries most of the political establishment in France, because everyone who thought that at 45 or 47 they were still young enough and I had hopes for a shot at the presidency, now they just become so old and so outdated.
Has he killed off a political generation as well then?
Oh, I think he's killed one, yeah, definitely. That's what, as you said, I mean, the fact that Hollande didn't didn't want to stand again. That was the first sign that a generation was about to go. As you said, Nicolas Sarkozy, Alain Juppé, all gone. Manuel Valls, young, energetic, or so we thought, prime minister, elbowed out of the socialist primary. And now Emmanuel Macron, who no one had heard of a year ago, is now the president-elect.
Dominic, the thought occurs if he takes some of that, because that really took some daring to walk out on President Hollande, who'd mentored him there, to walk out on him, set up his own party and take this huge gamble. Will any of that, you think, feed into his presidency, that it won't perhaps be safe and centrist, and that he will have to take and want to take some of those gambles?
Well, he's shown himself to be bold and decisive where it really counts, and he has a slightly diffident manner, which I think led people to underestimate him at the beginning. But that was a very bold move to strike out alone at a time where there were some pretty strong contenders against him. He's been decisive at key moments of this campaign, and I think he will be as a president. He also is lucky. And remember that Napoleon asked of his generals, I don't want just generals who are good, but also I want lucky generals. And I think that's part of his appeal. Yeah. And I think what I've encountered is I think the French have a mixture of they're inspired by him because he's young. He's like a kind of JFK, Tony Blair figure. I think there's also a sense of trepidation as well, a concern that France is entering unknown territory here, where the president who is so young at a time when the country is in such political turmoil, so divided. He's untested in office, and crucially, he's not tested in Parliament. He doesn't have a parliamentary party behind him. So his big challenge is now translating this resounding victory into something that will give him power in Parliament.
And the other thing I'm going to bring in is, diplomatic and international experience, and let's relate it first of all to Brexit. How might this affect the Brexit negotiations? This is the European axis, the EU axis, tilting back to where it wants to be, I suppose.
I don't think it's very good news for Britain, because I think Emmanuel Macron will be a tough negotiator when it comes to Brexit. And I think the Franco-German axis is back on track after 5 years of really non-happening events between Hollande and Merkel. So when it comes to Britain and Brexit, I think Macron, who's also a pragmatist, he's not ideological at all, but he will be a tough one, because, I mean, he campaigned on Europe and on the European Union, and he won on that, which was surprising.
Yeah, but Dominic, I mean, we were talking about Brexit specifically, we saw him as candidate Macron, coming over to meet Theresa May, coming out of number 10 Downing Street while she presumably was still inside, and then standing there in a news conference and saying, right, I want to steal a lot of British jobs, I want to take them over to Paris.
He did it on the doorstep. I was outside Downing Street when he did it. He was given a privileged audience with Theresa May, which was a boost to his campaign, put him on the sort of world stage there, and then he came out straight away, walked across the street and said to us, I want British bankers, researchers, academics to move to France, which was seen as extremely cheeky, I think, by people inside the May government, even if they didn't say so. So on the one hand, people say, well, the European Union will now be more relaxed, less insecure, and therefore may be able to be more confident in its negotiations, which could be in the interest of the British as they negotiate with a less jittery European Union, not so jealous about protecting its interests. On the other hand, as Bruno is saying, he's very much a pragmatic man, but also a pretty determined negotiator.
Does he have, though, here's the thought occurs here, Bernard, does he have something to learn perhaps from Theresa May? Now, we've got a general election coming up and we'll see how that pans out. But we just had local elections last week, and we saw there Theresa May with different divisions, but divisions, huge divisions, as Brexit exposed within the country, attracting votes from former Labour Party supporters, from UKIP supporters, from left and from right. Now, in a different way, but in a similar way as well, Emmanuel Macron faces that process in France to bring people in behind his presidency.
Well, you're right. I mean, he will learn first political survival from Theresa May, because she seems to be very gifted at that. And also, it will depend a lot on the Prime Minister he chooses, because if he wants to attract people, mainly from the right, Fillon's voters, he will have to nominate someone who's not repulsive, like François Bayrou, for example, but also slightly attractive and slightly and able to represent this new generation of politician that he wants to bring in.
Okay, well, you're talking about attracting there from the right, but what about, I was just talking, as I said, to a Mélenchon supporter from the far left, and he got, 19% in the first round, and she was talking about if he tries any of his labour reforms, of his social reforms, he could face social war. He's got some problems there too, hasn't he?
Yeah, we should I think, lay out exactly how the system works here. It's a semi-presidential system. Under the Fifth Republic, the president has a lot of power, but he needs support, ideally a majority in the parliament, to exercise his powers. And what's happened since 2002 is that parliamentary elections have come soon after the presidential elections, and with every presidential victory, the party has got a parliamentary majority, which has given previous presidents the power they need. Now, this is not by any means certain this time round, is it? What we could end up with is a cohabitation where you have the Prime Minister running the Parliament with a majority there from one party and the President from the other, or we could have, horror of horrors, a coalition. And what I think the big concern from the centre-right MPs I've been speaking to in the Legislative Assembly this week is that you can have a coalition which could be very weak. So that could rise and fall on individual issues, which would lead to a very unstable, weak form of government. So these celebrations and the sense of renewal and democratic renewal in France could be short-lived were that to happen. So what he has to do is get that either a majority of his own in Parliament or persuade others in other parties to come and join him. And I think the size of this victory makes that more likely for him.
Okay, and the size of the victory was something that attracted, I just want to read this out. President Trump has congratulated Emmanuel Macron to say the size of the victory, big win. I'm sure he said a big win. It really was a big win, a big win. Donald Trump says he looks very much forward to working with Emmanuel Macron. Do those kind of relationships, the US relationships, the international relationships, how did they fare under President Hollande? I mean, Donald Trump made it very clear that he was maybe not perhaps a strong fan, but he was quite interested in Frexit and Marine Le Pen.
It was, yeah. It'd be interesting to see because, as you said, I mean, Emmanuel Macron is completely untested on the international level. But I think, Donald Trump is a deal maker. I think Emmanuel Macron is a deal maker as well. I think he's more charisma. He'll get more interest from the international scene, the international press, the international politicians, and that should play in his favor. Whereas when Hollande was elected, he appeared as the old socialist, the old French socialist that no one really liked on the international stage anymore. So I think it's, watch this space.
Well, it is going to be watch this space, isn't it? Well, because he has to send out some signals to the French people as well that he's not getting patronised, he's not getting bossed around as the inexperienced guy, the new kid on the block.
And let's not forget, he was brought in as a kind of protege of François Hollande, and in that role, he travelled the world to a certain extent.
So he has that experience.
Yeah, and he's known in foreign capitals. He's known in America under a different administration, of course, but he's known in London. He's known across Europe, and he is going to be given a huge benefit of the doubt, obviously, across Europe, where there's a huge sigh of relief that here's a man who can possibly stem the advance of populism and anti-establishment voting and will reinvigorate not just his youth, but his ideas could reinvigorate the European Union with the Franco-German axis at the heart of it.
Let's talk about the defeated candidate, Marine Le Pen, and she made it very clear in her speech there when she conceded very, very quickly, it must be said, and with a degree of dignity to Emmanuel Macron. The fight goes on. The Front National is not going away. It's not going anywhere, and it could be back in 5 years' time.
That's what most of Macron's opponents have said, especially on the far left, is that if you get Macron now, there's a certainty you get Marine Le Pen, or any Le Pen actually, in 5 years. I'm not sure it's true because Macron's advantage compared to any former president is that he has absolutely no ties to anyone. He can do pretty much whatever he wants. He hasn't made any promises, actually. He's just agreed with many people in France, and people liked him for that. But as you said, Marine Le Pen will now try to embody the opposition. She tried to put it very clearly. You'll have the pro-globalization party, which is Emmanuel Macron's, and her patriotic party, the National Front, that will or is likely to change its name in order to broaden his base and attract many people from the right, especially people who voted François Fillon.
But his speciality, his expertise, and his programme is about market reforms, a bit of pain and then ultimate gain. Now, the problem with that approach is that the pain may go on for quite a long time, and the gain then doesn't affect, in particular, those people who either did support Marine Le Pen or were minded to. I mean, could he be? We don't know what's out there in terms of the global economy. Could he be a one-term president if he doesn't fix that?
I think it could be a lame duck president. That's the worry. He could be a weak president who tries to enter a cohabitation with the other party, doesn't get the kind of support he needs in Parliament, and possibly in a year or two the nation has to go back to the polls. I'm intrigued, Bernard, what you think about this idea of rebranding the Front National, though. And do you think the Le Pen name is so toxic that whatever you call the party, does the Le Pen family have to back out of it, do you think, or is she so integral to it that that's impossible?
I think Marine Le Pen has not done a very good campaign, and I wonder whether it's because she was the National Front candidate and she had that surname, that Le Pen name, which prevented her from, having any success. But I think what they need to do is to really professionalize themselves and appear as a potential governing party, which didn't appear when they had the debate between her and Macron. That's exactly where she lacked the professionalism and the presidential credit that you needed.
So do you see any kind of realignment, any kind of comeback? I mean, we're talking about En Marche, the party that didn't exist, still doesn't really exist in terms of members of the Legislative Assembly, certainly, and the rebranding of the Front National. What about the big two? What about the Socialists? What about the Republicans? I mean, has this election killed them off altogether, or is there a chance of a realignment?
The assumption seems to be the Socialists are all but dead, and that Benoît Hamon got 6 or 7%, and that Macron, I mean, his critics would say he's kind of emerged from the corpse of socialism with a new mask, but is intrinsically socialist. And the difficulty for him in Parliament is he's got to shrug that off, but also try and get the support of those socialist MPs. And on the right, the centre-right is divided. It's very bitter about what happened to Fillon. And so, yes, both established parties have a lot of challenges to face.
I'm going to pause you there, gentlemen, for a moment, because we're going to a break. Just as a pause in all the tooting of horns, apart from one down there, takes place, no doubt, because the traffic lights have turned against them on the Champs-Élysées. As the supporters of Emmanuel Macron gather steam, the lights change and up they come again, tooting their horns, waving their flags, standing up outside in the sunroof, some of them on the cars. When we come back, we are waiting to hear Emmanuel Macron address some of his jubilant supporters. Stay with us.